Hello, welcome back to Theater from My View. I am Amanda Washington, and today I have the first Theater from My View guest ever, Christian Cooper. Christian is a playwright, and he's also a fantastic actor that I had the opportunity to go to grad school with, and that is where I found out that he was a playwright. So, Christian, tell us, how did you get into playwriting? Like, what sparked your creative stuff?
Thank you, Amanda. First and foremost, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be with you on your YouTube channel. So I've been writing stories for as far back as I can remember. When I was really little, like 3, 5, toddler years, I really loved movies. I loved watching television. I was never really one to make a whole lot of friends, but I loved, coming home from school and watching television, watching movies. So ever since I can remember, I always loved, getting into those stories and playing those stories, reenacting those stories, probably how I became an actor as well. And then I would always be writing down these like little skits to perform for my family with, my brother and stuff like that. And they would usually involve the characters from the shows or the movies that I would watch. So, there was one with Scooby-Doo, there was one with Batman, and so forth. Then, as I was getting into high school and getting into college, as I was getting more and more into theater, I would sort of experiment with actual playwriting. When I was in college, I took a playwriting course, but in those years, I was writing more like comedic, like these absurd comedic sketches that would be more along the lines of Saturday Night Live or so forth. They weren't really plays. They were more like just me letting loose my sense of humor. It wasn't until recently, like the past couple of years when I got to grad school, where I actually started sitting down and exploring playwriting and what writing a play, a full-length play, can actually do.
Yeah. So you pull from TV shows that you watched. So is that how you got your inspiration for Shakespeare at the Tavern?
So Shakespeare at the Tavern was my first, it technically wasn't my first play, because like I said, I've been writing all my life, but it was my first play that I actually sat down and experimented with. How do you actually put a play together? For that play specifically, the inspiration came from when I was doing Taming of the Shrew with the Palm Beach Shakespeare Festival. That was the summer of 2016. I was playing the role of Tranio, and a bunch of us in the cast were joking around with the theory that Shakespeare wasn't the one to actually write the plays, that it was Christopher Marlowe who actually wrote all these plays and Shakespeare took credit. And, we were just joking around with that for the entire rehearsal process, all throughout performance. And one of my cast members said something to the effect of, in the words of the great Christopher Marlowe, "Damn it, Shakespeare, you've ruined me." And from that, I kind of got the idea of, I could write this short play that's just Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and maybe a couple other playwrights from that era just sitting in a bar and talking about theater. And then from that idea, more ideas kind of came with it. Mm-hmm. I kind of got the idea of, like, I could turn this play into talking about, like, the generation gap and how, like, the world is changing and how, like, we need to adapt to the changing world. How sometimes what worked in the past doesn't necessarily work today. Mm-hmm. And that there are people who don't necessarily get that. And if you aren't willing to adapt to the changing world, you will be left behind, essentially. So I can turn this conversation between Marlowe and Shakespeare and make it about that need to adapt to a changing world, out with the old, in with the new. And that kind of speaks to how I draw inspiration for my plays as a whole, Usually what happens is I get an idea, and the idea will come from whatever. It'll come from a multitude of different things. I do a lot of reading. Sometimes I'll get the idea like just when I'm working a menial job. I'll just get an idea like, oh, this would be an interesting story. And then I have like this little notebook that I keep, and I'll, sort of write the idea down, and then I kind of just put it away. I put the idea right on the shelf and sort of like just kind of leave it alone. And sometimes the idea stays with me. Sometimes, just writing it down, putting it on the shelf, that's not enough for me. Usually if I get like, from this concept, I'll get like a number of different ideas, like, oh, well, this would be an interesting character, or this would be an interesting theme to explore, or like, ooh, this would be a cool scene. Mm-hmm. So I'll start like, jotting down a couple different notes that are about this specific concept. And usually once it gets to the point where I can't sleep at night because all these ideas are swirling in my brain, that'll be the point where I'm like, okay, maybe I should just write this play. Because if I don't write this play, it won't leave me alone.
No, that makes so much sense. So with all the little jotting of notes and sleepless nights, what's your favorite play that you've written so far?
I don't think I have a favorite play so far, because I know that I'm constantly improving my work. My favorite play is the one that I'm currently working on. And that is true for whatever that play might be. Because when I'm working on a play, that is my world. Mm-hmm. That is my main focus. Now, once again, I'll probably get like an idea for a different play and I'll like write it down. But the one I'm working on, that is my main focus. Focusing on how to bring these characters alive, focusing on them, trying to get what they want, their character arcs, all that stuff. Their world is my world in that moment. That play is my favorite play. Now, once I get to the point where I've kind of done everything I can do with it, where there's not a whole lot of revisions I can make without an outside eye, seeing how it works on stage, putting it into a rehearsal process, seeing what works and what doesn't work on stage. Once I get it into this kind of limbo phase, that's when I sort of move on from it, move on to my next play to work on. When I'm in that in-between phase, I'm kind of in an evaluation phase. I evaluate like what worked for this, what didn't work, how can I improve for my next play.
I was going to say that, like a marinating phase, the resting period, so you can figure out if it needs anything before you put it on the skillet to cook it, i.e. put it on stage. Right. Exactly. Oh my goodness. Okay, so final question. If you could meet any artist, doesn't have to be a theater artist, who would it be and why?
Shakespeare. Without hesitation, Shakespeare. But here's why. Okay. So you have read my play, Shakespeare at the Tavern. If it wasn't obvious from that play, I am really fascinated in Shakespeare the person. We know Shakespeare the legend. We know Shakespeare the playwright. I am fascinated with who Shakespeare was as a human being. Who was this person, this human being? Like, what was their psychology? This person who wrote all these, in my opinion, brilliant stories and poetry. What was the human being like? So I would love to meet Shakespeare the person, maybe grab a drink with him, but I don't see us talking about theater a whole lot. I mean, obviously, I'd probably ask him a couple questions about playwriting, because why wouldn't I? Yeah. But I'd be more fascinated in his psychological makeup, because I know about his theatrical career from my studies. All throughout school. So yeah, I am just fascinated with Shakespeare, the human being.
All right, solid answer. I can accept that. If you had said just to talk to him about his plays, I was like, I'm pretty sure there's research you can do. But you actually had a good answer of talking to him about being a human and how it is to just be him, which is always a lovely thing and always a fascinating thing to do to a person. But Yes, I am so excited because you're going to be joining us next week to talk about your trilogy, which has 2 working titles, and both of them I really like, and maybe you'll tell us more about them in our next segment. But it's called the Black Trilogy, and the other working title is the Millennial Trilogy. So I'm so excited to hear about those things in our next segment. But thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.